South Africa's Reserve Bank has kept its benchmark rate unchanged at 5.75%. But for how much longer can the SARB keep its powder dry? The Reserve Bank governor himself, no less, has argued that as global oil prices recover and wage deals are gradually struck right across South African economy, inflation eventually will have to rise. We'll be examining the decisions not just for South Africa but also for Nigerian policymakers as well in this edition of Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up. There's a bumper harvest but little to show for it. We'll be looking at the plight of cereal farmers in Morocco. And we'll be in Brussels looking at the EU Parliament's decision to put tighter controls on minerals from war-torn countries. Now then, going by the decisions from the monetary policy committees in Nigeria and South Africa this week, staying the course and walking that fine line between raising rates and dealing with inflation seems like the default policy move. The South African Reserve Bank didn't change its policy rate at all. It held it 5.75%, but it warned of threats to inflation from rising energy costs and a weaker rand. Policymakers have kept borrowing costs unchanged since July last year in order to help support an economy battered by a brutal combination of industrial action, a lack of reliable power and falling household demand. Inflation has remained more or less within the 3 to 6% target band since August, but rising price pressures and a weaker rand may give the bank reason to tighten monetary policy in months to come.
Significant additional electricity tariff increases are likely to cause inflation to diverge significantly from the target range for a more extended period than our baseline forecast suggests. The rand remains vulnerable to global market reaction to US policy normalization, particularly in the context of South Africa's twin deficits. Any significant weakening of the exchange rate in reaction to US monetary policy tightening could cause inflation to diverge even further from target and set in motion an exchange rate inflation spiral. Furthermore, the possibility of a wage price spiral, should settlements well in excess of inflation become an economy-wide norm, also poses a risk to the outlook.
It's absolutely fascinating comparing the comments there from Letitia Kanyahu and, of course, and his counterpart in Nigeria, Godwin Emefiele. Now, speaking of Nigeria, the outgoing president in that country, Goodluck Jonathan, has approved a $22.6 billion budget for 2015. It was passed into law by Parliament in late April. Now, the budget spending outlay is about 3.2% smaller than last year's because the country's oil revenues have fallen significantly. In fact, they hit a 5-year low in April. Why? Global good prices have fallen by more than half in 2014. Now, oil sales do provide up to 80% of government revenues, and a costly election in Nigeria drained the limited available funds there. However, with the inauguration of Muhammadu Buhari just 8 days away, government spending patterns could change in the medium term. The incoming president is expected to crack down on excessive spending by government officials. Nigeria's incoming government says it will invest heavily in infrastructure and security while launching its 5-year strategic plan. The incoming president's party, the All Progressive Congress, was however passive about weaning Nigeria from its over-reliance on oil exports. A steep drop in crude oil prices in the global market has left Nigeria's economy severely battered on several fronts. Analysts are now urging the incoming administration to look beyond crude oil exports in order to secure the Nigerian economy from future price shocks.
We need to go back to agriculture because already there's a movement in place that is locked, that has been launched to unlock the value chains in agriculture. So I expect the incoming government to sustain that value chain approach to agriculture and invest more in agriculture, whether it is in cocoa or palm produce or groundnut, cotton, Now begin to refine this instead of exporting them as raw materials so that we can get more money. I expect to have cocoa and chocolate factories, around Nigeria. I hope to see the industries in the north, the textile mills in the north rehabilitated. I also expect to see more value added to the local palm produce. And of course, even as we are talking of, moving away from oil, we also have to tap all that is available from oil and gas.
Now then, Deji Badmus is live in Lagos tonight. He's got more data on APC's policy conference and, of course, the policies of the incoming Buhari administration. Deji, let's start with the Nigeria National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC. Breaking it up was a policy goal way before the elections. But how exactly does the party intend to achieve this? Is it necessary to change the petroleum industry bill in order to do that, or can it be done separately?
Well, thank you very much, Rama. It's difficult to tell at the moment if the incoming government would actually, make good its campaign promise now on the NNPC. What we know Buhari has said is that he intends to plug all the loopholes and leakages in the NNPC. He says the problem with the NNPC, he believes, is corruption. As we speak, the NNPC is partly commercialized, and so the issue of commercialization now cannot arise. Now, would the government want to change the petroleum industry bill just because to accommodate if, for instance, it plans to break up the NNPC? I doubt if that is going to happen. The petroleum industry bill has been in the National Assembly now for about 7 years. Unfortunately, the outgoing assembly, it appears, would not be able to pass that bill. And so the next assembly, the next parliament now will have to start the process afresh, because that is the rule of parliament. We do not know if Buhari is actually going to break the NNPC into bits and pieces the way, for instance, the national power company in this country, that the PHCN, that's a power holding company of Nigeria, was broken into bits and pieces. Because breaking them into bits and pieces means you're planning to privatize, a national asset. And if you ask me, most Nigerians would tell you that they would not be in support of the privatization of the NNPC, because it's a national asset, it's a thing of pride. I know that Buhari has said he intends to reform the way the NNPC is run. We just have to wait and see.
Indeed. Let's also talk about more energy matters. There's also an interesting objective in the manifesto, quadrupling Nigeria's installed generation capacity from 5 gigawatts to 20 gigawatts in 4 years. How is this expansion going to work? Is it mostly private sector led? Is it state led? And if it is state led, how will it be financed?
Well, first is it's a very good thing that the incoming government is giving itself a timeline. It's nothing new. When the late president Umaru Yar'Adua became president, he actually gave Nigerians a timeline and said he was going to generate about 10,000 megawatts of power in about 5 years. Now the APC government is saying it's going to push that up to between 5,000 and 10,000. Well, we do not know how it's going to do that, because as we speak, there are challenges in the power sector as we speak. Of course, it's been mainly privatized, and of course the APC has said it is going to continue with that privatization process. So you would expect that the funding will come from the private sector, and that the power reform process is going to be private sector driven. And people have also advised, experts have actually said, the government should not reverse the privatization process that is already in place that this government initiated. I do not see the incoming government changing that. And of course, everything is going to be private sector led. But there's no question that the government would have to come in at some point, just like what the government is doing now, supporting private enterprises that have bought into the power sector, providing them with loans just to help them to keep the power sector going. But unfortunately, things are really bad now. So how the Buhari government intends to push up the megawatts from the current 2,800 megawatts to about 5,000 or 10,000 in the next 4 years, well, we just have to wait and see how that happens. But then every Nigerian would tell you they would want to see that happen. As a matter of fact, is one of the reasons they voted Buhari in as president.
Indeed, but all this at the end of the day does boil down straight to money. Yet shareable revenues across all levels of government hit a 5-year low in April, and several of these policies that are being outlined in the manifesto do require significant amounts of capital. So which ones is the APC willing to postpone given the current lack of cash?
That's a very wonderful question, Rama, and a lot of people have asked that question too. But unfortunately, The APC has not been able to say where it intends to get the money to execute all those lofty programs it has talked about. For instance, we know at the moment that the government is borrowing to fund its recurrent expenditure. We know at the moment that our total debt profile as we speak today is about $60 billion, Rama. So how the APC is going to get money to fund all of this, you know, its manifesto, the programs now highlighted in its manifesto, it still beats my imagination. We know the prices of oil are not picking up as we expect. But one thing I can tell you straight away, there's no question that the APC will have to drop some of its program. And one of those programs would be, for instance, when it was campaigning, it says, it actually said it would be providing at least one meal per day for every Nigerian child in school. Now, I do not see that happening because there's just no way this government, I mean, the incoming government would be able to fund that. The question is, where is it going to get the money from? So I see the government, at least in the short term, pending when oil prices pick up, dropping off from some of its programs and probably wait until it begins to make money. Of course, the government has actually said it is going to plug the loopholes in government spending and all of that. But the question is, how much will the government be able to raise even after plugging those loopholes? Already this government, the outgoing government, has started that process, but then how much will it be able to raise and how far can whatever it is able to save go in terms of, you know, enabling the party now to meet some of those programs it has actually identified in its manifesto?
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you for your input, as always. That's Deji Badmus live in Lagos. Now, at face value, 2015 summer is a pretty good one if you happen to be a farmer in Morocco. You've had good rains, you've got a bumper cereal harvest too. But as Mahia Mutu reports, you're also facing a completely different set of problems. Lower profits, rising costs and a crippling lack of storage facilities.
Morocco is expecting an exceptional cereal harvest this year. The Agriculture and Fisheries Ministry announced that output is likely to hit a record 11 million tons, up from 6.7 million last year. This is thanks to good rainfall and optimal use of fertilizer and machinery. And there's more good news. Crédit Agricole Bank has announced that it's earmarking around $512 million to the farming sector.
The amount from the bank will be used to market the products and also will be used to boost investment this year, one that is very good.
Yet, despite the positive outlook, there are concerns from many in the sector. According to agriculture experts, Morocco is not properly equipped to store its cereals because it lacks good infrastructure.
The record harvest will create many problems. The first of them will be storage. Storing wheat is not a question of time, but a strategic one. Morocco should have it. But if the country wants to have it, this will take more time and funds that are not available right now. Because Morocco will still need to import huge quantities of grain to satisfy the demands of the local market.
Morocco does not produce sufficient amounts of soft wheat, widely consumed by Moroccans, who are big bread eaters. And while the bumper harvest should reduce the import bill, a lot of the harvest is poor in quality, denying the country that advantage.
This year the harvest is good, but prices are low. Also, there are no farm workers, and this year the price of a quintal of wheat varies between 40 and 41 dirhams, while it was 51 dirhams last year. Also, the price of hay is going down this year. Last year, a hay bale was worth 25 dirhams, but it does not cost more than 8 dirhams this year. The farmer is losing in everything.
It is an excellent year, thanks to God. The harvest is very good, but we have expenses for insecticides, fertilizers and phosphates. We had a good season, but the market is down.
To protect the local harvest, the government has raised custom duty on soft wheat imports from 17.5% to 75%. Mahia Mutwa, CCTV.
Right, then a quick run through the markets here for you. One of those days with mixed numbers across the board. Strongest gains, however, coming through all the way from Asia, partly, of course, from that tailwind coming through into the markets from the government's decision to essentially drop off, suspend capital gains tax for at least 2 years. We'll be in Brussels shortly. The EU Parliament voted for tighter controls on minerals from conflict countries. And drone lovers rejoice. At least if you're in South Africa, you've got new regulations to govern the use of these devices.
Sustainable development and a commitment to developing partnerships with Africa. Some of the key phrases already used at the Africa Global Business Forum here in Dubai.
There is a need for a predictable environment in which investors have to put their money.
Welcome back to the program. You're still watching Global Business Africa from the Kenyan capital. Now then, mineral importers in the European Union might have to be required to be certified before trading in order to cut the risk of funding armed groups in conflict zones around the world. That will happen if a new set of rules approved by European legislators on the 20th of May becomes law. Members of the European Parliament also approved proposals to have smelters and refiners undergo compulsory independent third-party audits for compliance. Now, the law is expected to affect some 880,000 downstream companies which use tin, tungsten, tantalum and gold in manufacturing a wide range of consumer electronics. Military groups in conflict areas like the eastern end of the Democratic Republic of Congo often use the sale of minerals found in their territory or territory they control to fund their activities. Now, the EU is among the world's largest importers of metals with a share of about 35% of global trade. Let's head over to Brussels now. Jack Barton is live over there. He's been following this debate in detail. Jack, how does this law passed by the EU's Parliament compare to Section 1502 of Dodd-Frank in the United States?
Well, there are similarities to Dodd-Frank, but the EU legislation is much more aggressive, much more far-reaching. If you look at Dodd-Frank, it's really just covering those companies that initially deal with the minerals like gold, tantalum, tungsten and tin, like refiners, manufacturers. But when it goes down the supply chain, when you're looking at a component that goes into a circuit board, those companies do not need to report it. And also, if that circuit board is made outside of the United States and brought in, and somewhere in that circuit board is a component with a tiny bit of one of those minerals, that also does not have to be reported. It does in the European Union, so it is much deeper. But another interesting comparison to Dodd-Frank is just how much difficulty there has been so far with compliance and reporting. This has emerged as a real issue in the United States, and given that it is not as comprehensive, the Dodd-Frank compared to the European legislation, it gives an indication of how difficult it might be to implement this in Europe.
Indeed. Give us a sense of how exactly these rules approved by the EU Parliament will then become law. What needs to happen between those two stages?
Well, theoretically, under normal conditions, they would be law now. This is highly unusual that the Parliament has voted for it, and it's now going to go on for further discussions, because the Parliament is normally the end of the process. Normally, the European Commission would come up with some legislation. It would then go around the Council of Leaders, all 28 member states, and then it would go to the European Parliament. But what's happened is legislation has been proposed by the Commission, and then at the last moment, the left faction of the Parliament has reinforced it or made it a lot tougher, put that to the vote. Nobody seems to have expected it to pass, but it actually passed with a sizable majority. So it's caught everybody by surprise. So technically, it should be legislation right now. Companies should be complying, but instead they've made an exception because this has been such a controversial and divisive issue. There will now be talks held with the European Commission, the EU's legislative branch, and also with the European Council to try and get an agreement so this has broad support before it comes into being official legislation.
Indeed. So then how exactly would this system of mandatory mineral tracing and verification actually work in practice?
That's the million-dollar question, of course, because this really is aimed at Africa, as you mentioned before. The Democratic Republic of Congo, particularly the east of that country, is in the target of this legislation. But right across Africa, minerals account on average for almost a quarter of all GDP when it comes to exports. There are supposed to be at least 27 countries from which conflict minerals are coming from. So it's going to be very difficult to trace them. It involves a lot of the minerals arriving in Europe. And again, it's not just the importers, the refiners, smelters, the manufacturers who are going to have to report. It's going to go right down to the small to medium-sized businesses, only stopping once it hits the actual retailer. And there is no single mandatory form. What they have to do is do an investigation down the supply chain, their own investigation. There's no guideline exactly how they're going to do this to identify the risks in that supply chain. But because they haven't been given a clear template of how to do this, it's sort of everyone's going to have to make it up as they go along. And as you mentioned before, it's about 880,000 companies that will be making it up as they go along.
Indeed, devilishly complex all the same. We'll keep tabs on that story. Thanks, Jack. That's Jack Barton live in Brussels. Now, South Africa's Civil Aviation Authority has released its highly anticipated regulations on the use of drones, or UAVs, if you want to use the proper term. These regulations come into effect on the 1st of July, when drone flying will be legalized. Travis Andrews has more.
After months of waiting, the South African drone industry finally has the answer. Flying a drone or remotely piloted aircraft system will be legal in the country. That is, of course, if you follow the new regulations that have been set out by the Civil Aviation Authority. Among other things, they call for operational competency tests to be taken for those wanting to use drones for commercial purposes. Recreational users need to stick to new minimum safety standards imposed, like not flying above any people or not closer than 10 kilometers from the nearest aerodrome. But not all stakeholders have welcomed the new legislation. Some believe it's caught the drone industry on the tail end of a spike in business.
There is a lot of uncertainty at the moment, and of course it's absolutely their fault that there's obviously a lot of uncertainty, because they should have actually had proper guidelines set up from the beginning. And now that it's a booming business for everybody and everybody's getting on board, they want to start chapping in rules, and obviously people need to follow these rules, and unfortunately I think it's a bit late. Look, under the new law, of course, people can still keep on purchasing Phantoms from us and Inspires, providing we obviously make them aware of the current rules in the legislation, and obviously make sure that they follow those rules. You know, that is where we can start.
Drones have become a powerful production tool that have allowed users to bag shots in a relatively cost-effective way. But with new legislation guiding its use on film sets, it could potentially hamper any future big money film deals for the city.
Cape Town has a very big film community. You know, it's a massive industry. We know of a lot of jobs that went away that needed to have aerial camera footage, and they couldn't. And when those jobs were taken away, they didn't come. When they couldn't use the aerial cameras, they basically didn't come to South Africa. So the amount of money not coming into the country on the film sets is also massive.
But that sentiment is not shared by all stakeholders in the industry. To others, the new regulations are far more progressive and accommodating than understood, and that long overdue safety measures have been addressed.
I definitely think having regulations is a great thing. Safety is really important, and with the ease of flying these machines these days and someone buying on off the shelf, you can potentially be flying quite a big, heavy, potentially dangerous aircraft without much experience, and having some sort of regulation will be great to stop amateurs or fly-by-night type people getting involved.
For now, there remains a balance of opinions, but one thing is clear, in that the regulations heralds in a new era where the drone industry will become a technological sector to soar. Whatever the argument may be for proponents or opponents of the new legislation, come July the 1st, it will become law and implementable. And flying a drone or remotely piloted aircraft system will become legal in South Africa. That was Andrew, CCTV, Cape Town.
Now, a new app which enables more babies to get access to donated breast milk is being rolled out in South Africa. Mobile phones are a key platform in the collection and the pasteurization of such milk, which proponents say is helping to save the lives of some very young people.
This one-day-old baby was born prematurely in Durban's King Edward VIII Hospital. The infant will be given donated milk until his own mother is well enough to feed him.
This small baby is preterm, 980 grams. The preterms are prone to NEC. Now NEC means necrotizing enterocolitis. Because preterms have organs that are not well developed, their intestines are too fragile for formula milk. So we give them breast milk because of the good properties of the breast milk. One of the possible complications with preterms is NEC, and formula can also not be prepared in a clean environment. So breast milk from a mother is best. Breast milk fights any infection that the baby might have, so it's very helpful.
But first, the donated milk must be pasteurized before it's fed to babies. One mobile phone app does exactly that.
What's amazing about this system is it's done through flash heating, which is linked to a cell phone, which has an app which is able to monitor what the temperature of the milk is, when the milk needs to be cooled, and then also we're able to upload that data to a database which can be monitored in different sections, and we can do quality assurance with it.
The Phone Astra app is being lauded as the first simple and low-cost human milk pasteurization system. As well as low birth weight babies, HIV-exposed and orphaned infants also benefit from donated mother's milk.
Expressing is not the easiest thing in the world, especially if you've got a busy family, and it does take the commitments of everyone in the home. But even if you get 5 or 10 mils at a time, freeze it. You can always do it again tomorrow, and it's wonderful bringing the milk in and just seeing the stocks build up, and also knowing I may never meet these babies, but I am giving them a good start, and I really encourage anyone to give it a try and to make a difference.
The system is being rolled out in other South African hospitals, as well as in Namibia and Ethiopia. Maria Galang, CCTV.
Let's make a quick run through the currencies here for you. Really, the story to look out for here is in East Africa. 97 shillings to the dollar. A bit of end-month demand coming through, of course, but also keep in mind the interbank rate also went up to over 11%. So that does suggest there's quite a bit of a liquidity squeeze coming through in the market. Now, here's what we're working on for tomorrow's program. Economists in South Africa, they're welcoming a deal between governments and unions raising civil servants' pay, as well as their contribution to their medical scheme. That takes a huge amount of risk off the table. Also, we'll be in Uganda. Artists over there are reviving the glory of the bark cloth. It's one of the country's most treasured indigenous fabrics. We'll be looking at it in detail right here in tomorrow's program. But that's it for tonight's edition of Global Business. As always, we welcome your feedback, your ideas, your story tips. Global Business Africa at cctv.com is the email to use. And of course, as always, Facebook and Twitter are your port of call for the news 24/7. I'm Ramanyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Good night.